Hello, my name is Brent McCormick. Today what I'm going to be looking at is we're going to be talking about activity-based costing and the theory of constraints. And what we want to do is we want to take a look at each of these individually and then take a look at them together to see if they're compatible with each other. Both of these are ways for companies to implement a continuous improvement model, and they have different focuses, and we're going to discuss that. The first thing we want to look at is activity-based costing. And activity-based costing is in contrast to the traditional costing system, which tries to allocate overhead costs based on units of output. And activity-based costing is different because it tries to do it on units of input rather, and determine what the cost drivers are that way. And this is more accurate for several reasons that we don't really have time to go into. But essentially what you have to understand is that if your company produces two different products, there's different inputs likely going into those two products, and those inputs are going to have different costs. And so the activity-based costing system allows you to truly understand what costs you have and what the true cost of producing a product or a service are to your company. This will help you to set your prices better so that you're not either overpricing yourself and pricing yourself out of the market, or underpricing yourself and not allowing yourself to recover the cost of your product. And so this is very important for companies to understand how useful it can be to them. Moving on to the theory of constraints, what it is, it's a little bit different. When you look at activity-based costing, there's a lot of, mathematical calculations that you do with it to understand it. With the theory of constraints, it's a little bit different because it's more of a method of discovering those problems and then guiding the problem-solving process than it is of a how-to manual saying, you know, this is your problem, this is how you need to solve it. And so that's a very important distinction to understand between the two methods. You know, the theory of constraints could be concerned with any problem. It basically is just trying to say, you go into a company, you try to determine what are your constraints, what is keeping you from reaching your company's goals or improving your performance. And once you determine that, then there's a guided, I like to refer to it as a way to guide the discussion on how to solve that problem, but it doesn't straight up tell you how to solve the problem. And so the reason that people will say there might be a conflict between the two in determining compatibility is because they say there might be some overlapping on the two. Let's say you go into a company with the theory of constraints approach and you determine that the quality isn't up to customer expectations. And so you go about implementing new procedures to try to raise that quality, but in addition that'll usually raise costs. And what people will usually try to say is that with activity-based costing, you're trying to lower your costs, and so these two different approaches are now at odds. You have one that's trying to raise quality, which raises your price, and the other one which is trying to lower your cost. I don't think this is necessarily true. When you look at activity-based costing, I don't think there's anything that really says it is to reduce costs to the lowest level possible. What activity-based costing is you're trying to really understand what your costs are. It's trying to understand what goes into your products and services so you can just better understand those costs. If you choose to lower your costs to the lowest amount possible with that information, then that's fine, but that's not necessarily the end game of activity-based costing. And so I think that's important for people to understand. And I think that moves us into determining the compatibility of the two and reasons why the two really are compatible. I think the difference in approach is the first reason that they're compatible. The two aren't necessarily going for the same thing. The one is focused completely on understanding and controlling costs, and then the other one is just more general problems. The two can come together and work on, you know, costs or whatever, but they're not necessarily going to be doing the same thing. And one analogy that I like to use is to imagine a mechanic and in a car. Let's say the car is the company and the mechanic is management. And what the mechanic will do is when the car gets into him, he doesn't really understand what the problems are. So what he'll do is he'll take an approach to kind of run some tests and different experiments to determine what the problems are, and then he goes about fixing it. But let's say you take the car into the mechanic and you also want him to work on the fuel efficiency because you don't want to spend so much money on gas. That's one problem that he's going to be working on, but it doesn't necessarily go against, you know, his overall synopsis of the car and trying to determine all the problems there. And so it's kind of a rough analogy, but I think it kind of demonstrates the point, is that the mechanic can still work on fuel efficiency while also solving other problems. And if he determines that fuel efficiency is a problem, then he can just focus his efforts on that problem alone. And so I don't see why there would be any reason the two aren't compatible. And I think an effective company should even have kind of a blend of the two. They should, try to implement an activity-based costing approach, as well as trying to implement the theory of constraints in order to discover any other problems within their organization.